morning, everybody.
Sound check.
How was the party yesterday night? Good? Okay, we have a session talking about Office 365 and Windows Azure and a lot of development stuff. My name is Martina Grom. I'm an MVP for Office 365, so I'm more on the cloud side than on the on-premises side and on the infrastructure side. And my colleague is Tony Pohl.
Hello from my side. My name is Tony Pohl. I'm MVP for client development, which means I'm doing a lot of development, architecture stuff, solutions mostly for Office 365. And we have a demo-packed session, so you will see a lot of code.
So, and as you may heard, we are not native speakers, so we are from Austria, which is in Europe, and many people say, okay, Australia, you have kangaroos there. In fact, there are no kangaroos in Austria, but we have a lot of history. We have Salzburg and Vienna, and some Americans know the musical Sound of Music. We actually, as Austrians, never saw that musical, but I think it's very famous and popular in the United States. And what we do is we have a development company since, I think, almost 20 years, 50 years now in this constellation. And we do mainly Microsoft stuff and mainly web-based solutions. So we do business to business and databases and identities and Office 365 and so on. This is our agenda, and what we will show you is why it's a good thing to know something about the development capabilities you have within Office 365. Because it's a standardized service, you can use it as it is, but sometimes people have requirements to optimize the provisioning process and to optimize identities and that solutions. And we have two demos today. The first one is about Azure Active Directory. Pardon me if I say Windows Azure Active Directory. I got used to that expression in the last 2 years. So we show you Azure Active Directory, how this works and how this relates to Office 365. And the second part of the demonstration is around Office 365 services. And that means we will show you how you can implement a solution, send automated emails for beginners, or provision the My Site and do something in SharePoint and things like that. And the last part is we will deploy our solution to Microsoft Azure and to show how this will work online. And if you're interested in the source code of today's demo, we wrote a blog post. It's already online, so you can download the sources from the blog and look into the solution for yourself.
The address of the blog is blog.atwork.at, so it should be online right now. And maybe a question before, who in the room is using Office 365? What a lot, wow, cool. That's good stuff.
Already in production or only in demo? Production, good.
Very cool.
So the scenario is, what we want to do is we want to show how you can provision users with Azure Active Directory and what we need for automation and remote control in that solution. And that scenario is very easy. We have a company which is acting globally. So we share one Office 365 tenant, and we have different subs in different locations. We have, for example, a sub in Austria, some in Brazil, one in Washington and in Boston, and so on. And as you may know, Office 365 offers a role-based access model. That means that an administrator can administer the service, or the users, or the passwords, or the invoices, but always for the whole tenant, and not for a group of users within the tenant. So there is no delegation in the moment within Office 365. This is a point which is missing in there. And what we will show here is how you can split the user management, that you can say, for instance, my users in Boston, my administrator there can only administrate his users which are located in Boston, and the same in Washington, and the same in Austria. So we made a delegation possibility within Office 365. And why did we do that? It's because I talk a lot. I started with Microsoft Online Solutions in 2008. My first product was Forefront Online Protection for Exchange, or Exchange Hosted Services, or Exchange Online Protection, or whatever the name is. So, and I talked a lot with customers, and they said, okay, we don't want to go to the cloud, we don't trust it, and so on. But what we have seen with our customers is that they want predictable costs, and they want to learn how to do it and how to implement those solutions. This is, in fact, what we experience with our customers, that they want a delegation. For instance, if you have a franchising company, you need delegation among your user base. And also, customers want a remote control possibility. They say, I will provision a user, I will send him a welcome message, I will send him a message and a file into his OneDrive for business, and so on. And what we have seen with our users is that 99% of our users are really happy with Office 365 and use it a lot.
Maybe there's always 1% who doesn't like something, but the rest of the users are really happy with the services. And for developers, it's great to have software as a service because you can automate a lot. And that's what this session is about. So our mission, what we plan to do in the next 60 minutes, I want to draw here, maybe something like here. We have our company and some users.
So we name it House of Developers. We have a president here. His name is Gary. And we have two subs. One sub is in Washington. The president from this sub, his name is Frank. Another sub is Boston. Her name is Claire. And our administrator, his name is Douglas. He wants to administer the users.
I apologize for my handwriting.
Yes, so we have Gary, we have Frank, and we have Claire. And we have an Office 365 admin. His name is Douglas. And we have Office 365, and on the other side, we have Windows Azure.
So what we want to accomplish is that we build a kind of portal for the administrators of Office 365 so that they can manage their users and that they can provision new users. If a new employee comes to the company, he should get a welcome message, he shall get a new provisioned My Site, he should get a document in his My Site, and he should put into security groups so that he can access special SharePoint sites. So our developers in our company will create a web portal, and with that web portal, we want that these users can access Office 365. So how will we do that? We'll use a mechanism. We want to authenticate the user, of course the administrator user, with our Windows Azure Active Directory. And once the user is authenticated within our portal, we want them to access special services in Office 365. And there are two ways to do that. One way is to use the new Office 365 APIs, which means we take that user, take his authentication token, and put him against some services. And the second way is to use some kind of service account. That's the way we will use, because we want to do special tasks the ordinary user isn't allowed to do. So this is what you see here on the slide. The blue user is the one authenticated against our web portal, and the red user is the service account we are using for doing special things for that user.
And you see we create a user, add the user to a security group, which we will need afterwards for SharePoint Online. And then we send him a welcome message to his mailbox. And afterwards, we will provision his My Site, his OneDrive for Business site. Then we will create a welcome document, which will be stored into his My Site. And afterwards, we add user information about that user into SharePoint Online.
Exactly. So this is what we'll see in the next minutes. What do we need for doing these tasks? Well, we need our prerequisites are, of course, we need an Office 365 tenant. You can get a free one for 1 month at office.microsoft.com. We need Microsoft Azure. Of course, we need to host our solution somewhere. You also can get a free trial if you don't have one. And of course, we need Visual Studio 2013. It must be 2013 because the first demo we will show you needs a wizard which is only built in there. So with that, let's jump into our code. The first demo is just about authentication. So I switch to my desktop. And I want to show you from the scratch on how it works with authentication. So let's open Visual Studio and simply create a new project. And as I said before, we want to create a web application, a kind of portal site, which is a simple ASP.NET web application. I like the new wizard much more than the old one because you simply say, okay, ASP.NET. Let's put it in my demo path, and well, let's call it web application. So in the next step, I can choose what type of template I want to use, and you see here on the right side is authentication. So if you switch through the project types, you see that this authentication here gets active or inactive. I want to create a new MVC application, and I simply use the change authentication, and there are 4 possibilities. I don't want to use authentication, or I want to use individual user accounts, for example, like here, Facebook, Twitter login, and so on, or organizational accounts. That's the thing we want to use, or Windows authentication. So what can we do in here? We can say, okay, I want to use Azure Active Directory, and do I want to use a single organization or multiple organizations or on premises? In my case, I want to authenticate against an Office 365 tenant, so as a single organization. The domain we registered is a test domain. It's iammaconmicrosoft.com. And the access level I want to use in my application, I can choose between just log in, or do I want to do something with the Active Directory? Do I want to read or write into Active Directory? Let's say I want to do everything, and in the more options, I can say, what's the URI of my application? This URI usually is something like your company name / application. It simply must be in HTTP format, so it doesn't matter what you put in here. I leave it as the wizard suggested. So web application 1. Now, of course, I have to authenticate against the Active Directory, and I'm using the administrator. For doing this, you have to have a global administrator. It doesn't work with a simple user. So this user will write into Active Directory. So you must use a global admin. So it's iammaconmicrosoft.com, and the password. Okay, if I didn't mistype it, it should now connect to Active Directory. It takes a little bit. And after that is done, I'm back at the wizard step 2 to create my application. And you see the authentication now will be added to my project. And now I click OK, and you will see on the status line that the project here on the left bottom corner is created, and there will be added some libraries from NuGet. One of the libraries is ADEL, which means Active Directory Authentication Library. You will see it here there's Bootstrap and adding jQuery and all the stuff. So Visual Studio creates a ready-to-use project for me. I don't have to program anything. The authentication will just be built in. So I think it will be finished right now. And I get a new ASP.NET MVC application. And the interesting part here is first have a look at web config. What's new in here? You see this application, of course, is using Entity Framework, and there are two new sections, Identity Model, which are used for authentication. Then we have a database. The database is simply used for storing the thumbprint for the authentication. So it's made more or less automatically. It simply is a permanent storage for our thumbprint. And here comes the part of our application, this identity keys. Okay, I'm using ReSharper. So here I get the federation metadata location. So if I look at that URL, there's a document, and if I simply open it, that's the document used for the authorization. So if I look for login, for example, here's the address of the endpoint that's used for the login process, and there's also an endpoint for the logout. So this document describes how the login shall work. What else do we have here? We have our URI. It's called wheel here, and the audience URI, which is the same. We find this address, I think, 4 times in web config. It's not really pretty, but it's how it works right now. And here comes the interesting part. The wizard created an application within my Active Directory, because on the other side, if that wouldn't happen, every application could say, I want to authenticate against that Active Directory. So this is the key that's stored in the Active Directory for this application, the client ID, 28 and something, and of course the password. And the password, you don't see it in the Active Directory, but of course it must be stored there, because we have to use this key for getting access to it. This is standard ASP.NET. We say, okay, we only want to allow authenticated user within our portal, and the rest is, here's again the issuer name registry entry and the audience URI, which is also the same. And we have at the end of config, we have the same in here, the issue of this document, and again the audience URI. So you see it's 4 times in here. It's a little bit too much in my opinion, but anyway. So if I start the application, there's the global ASAX, and here's the redirect, which will happen. So let's simply start it and see how it looks. Oh, sorry, I started it with the wrong browser, because I wanted to use Internet Explorer for that. And now the redirect takes place, self-signed certificate. And if everything works, I should now get a login screen from Office 365.
Or more from Windows Azure.
I think your mic isn't working.
No.
Actually, it's, yeah, as you said, it's the login screen of Azure Active Directory. So use our admin and the password and log into my application. I get a redirect to my localhost 44304, and now I'm logged in my application. This is a standard ASP.NET MVC application, so it doesn't do anything. The only thing that's happening in here is I'm authenticated and I can read data from the logged in user. In that case, it's only a display name, a first name, and a last name. So how does it work? Let's have a look into the web application. And there's a controller, a home controller, I think. in here, there's the user profile. And let's simply look what's happening behind the scenes. So I click on the user again. The first thing that's happening in here is I need a tenant ID for my Active Directory. Then we create an authentication context, and here's the app ID and my app secret. That's converted to a credential, and that credentials are used for getting a token. And this is the most interesting part. This is the endpoint I'm gonna working against with, and you see in here there's graph.windows.net, then there's the ID of my Windows Azure Active Directory, and then there comes, I want to get information about users, and the username is admin@imaconmicrosoft.com, and I want to use Graph API version. In that case, it's an older version. It's a version of April last year. There's a new version. I think the last version is from November. Of course, you can use this new version too, but it works a little bit different. But this wizard uses the old version. And after that, we create an HTTP client and say, okay, we want to request information from there and add a header for that. And what we get back is this and response strings. And you see the response strings is a JSON document with information about that user. And the last part is simply return the view, and the view is somewhere visualized in here in that page, user profile. So it's actually very simple using this authentication. You see, I didn't have to program anything. And if you're interested, okay, what methods does this Graph API have? How can I use it myself? There's a great tool I want to show you, which is the Graph Explorer. The address is graphexplorer.cloudapp.net. And if you go to that URL, you have this menu here. You can use a demo company, or if you have your own Active Directory, as we have, you can simply log in here. Now I've already done that, and this is the base address of the Graph Explorer, and you see the kind of methods they're in. I'm really happy that the Azure Active Directory team made this little solution in Windows Azure, because it's very helpful for the developers. So for example, if you look into the users, what users are in there, you get all the information in there. I know there's a user Tony somewhere, and you can see this user object in here with a city of Vienna and so on. What's really interesting, what the wizard did, he created an application for me, and that's why our demo works. So if you look into the applications right now, our application is web application number 1. You see, here's the entry for that. This is the application. This is the app ID we are using. You don't see the secret here, as I said. And the interesting part here, of course, is the reply URL. After the user is authenticated, which URL should be redirected to? And that's our localhost 44304. So this is how it works. Cool. So with that, close our demo 1 and switch to our demo 2. We saw how simple it is to use Windows Azure Active Directory for your own applications, if it's a web application, for example. Now we want to use this method to manage users. We want to create users, we want to edit them, we want to delete them, and we want to do all the tasks we saw before. And we want to use, of course, with the SharePoint conference, we want to use a little bit of Exchange and SharePoint, of course. How can we do that?
So we have many access points. We can do that. Maybe you're questioning yourself why we don't do that via PowerShell, because it's also possible to do that via PowerShell. If you use Graph or Graph API, the functionality is much faster for developers. So you see that the provisioning is on an instant basis. And what we will else do is we will show SharePoint Online solutions, and there in SharePoint Online we use CSOM and REST and a little bit of PowerShell. The PowerShells in SharePoint Online in the moment are really limited. We have, I think, 34 or 35 PowerShells which you can use. So if you develop a solution, you will automatically switch to REST or CSOM sometimes because they are so limited you cannot do anything with them or less with them. On Exchange Online, Exchange is a very major service. You have anything. You can do almost anything with PowerShell. And you have also a management API. You have EWS services and so on. And hopefully we will get also a management API in the future. Because the main reason what we've discovered is use PowerShell whenever you want and whenever you can. But if you are into development, use an API because it's faster, to be honest. It's, you don't wait some time and so on.
Yeah, just to interrupt you for a second, we wanted to create an Azure website with remote Exchange PowerShell, and right now it's not possible. It was possible for a short time, but now you can't use that functionality in a web site. You have to use a cloud service for that, and deploy the remote PowerShell commandlets to that.
And what else do you have for Link Online? There is an SDK for Link Online. It's an old SDK, to be honest. We don't use it, so we try to use PowerShell as well there because it's really limited. I think it's Silverlight. You can use it in a not in a web app. And the last part is we have now new Office 365 APIs, which are now in a preview state. And they are really useful to play around, but they are not useful to go into production yet in the moment.
Exactly. There are 2 sessions about the Office 365 API. One was yesterday. You can, if you haven't seen it, look at the video. And there's another one today, I think at 1:30, where they show the Office 365 API. From our perspective, that's a great thing, and that's the future to use Office 365 API. But for special functionality, it's not possible right now, as Martina said.
Yeah. And the first part is around Graph API and PowerShell. You have already seen that, so you can authenticate your applications with Azure Active Directory. And to switch in our second demo, we will show you how to create users.
So our second demo, I've already opened it here, consists of 3 projects. We have our own project website. It's called My Portal Web. We have an Azure Active Directory helper project, Graph Helper. I will show you immediately how it looks like. And we have this Office 365 Claims Connector for doing all the tasks we want to do now. So let's have a look into the web portal in our main project. The same story here. We've created that project in the same way we did it in our first demo. So we are going against this I'm Mac on Microsoft.com Office 365 tenant. So I would say simply start the project. Sorry. I'm always too fast in clicking. I'm already authenticated in here, so I want to show you the full experience again. Maybe I simply close that one. And
the fun part, if you deal a lot with identities, you need a lot of browsers and private mode.
Definitely. I think I log in, 100 times a day or something like this, and I always use at least 3 browsers and private mode, to make sure that you don't have a problem with already logged in sites and cookies and all this stuff. So our second demo, we authenticate also as administrator for that tenant, and we have some code in here. So that's the administrator. And while we log in, I've opened another browser here just and opened the Office 365 portal. There are some users in our tenant. There are 2 admins because I connected this Office 365 tenant to the Windows Azure portal. we have an external user here, and with our president Gary, a user Max and a user Tony. So there are not many users inside there. And this is our portal. The first thing we did, we extended our client information a little bit, just to show you the more information about the user object we saw in the Graph API before. We also are reading the user principal name, his language, his nickname, and so on, and his object ID. This simply works if I go to the view and I think it's the user profile. Yeah, so we're simply using more information about the user object. It comes from Azure Active Directory from Adele, this functionality. So the first thing we want to use, we want to manage users. And for that, we have 3 parts in here: user management, some actions against SharePoint, and Exchange. Let's start with the user management. In the user management, we are reading all the users from Graph API. So these are the same users you saw before in the Office 365 portal. I just want to create a new one. And the new one is Frank. Let's call him Frank Overwood and give him the name Frank and a password. Oh, I hope I didn't mistype it. And there are some other fields I can fill in or not. So let's create that user and see how this works. First of all, we fill the user object. So we get a user. You see it's of the type Active Directory.user. And then we simply fill in the properties for that user, a nickname, a given name, and all that stuff. That's a very important thing here. Usually in Office 365, a user has to change his password, unless you set this property and say, okay, I don't want that user to be, that he has to change the password. Why don't we want to do it? Because we want to do something in the name of the user now, in the next steps. So we want to make sure that his password stays as we typed it. Of course, the account is enabled, the usage location, and the preferred language. And now it's working like this: directory service, add to users, and I add this user object. So I'll simply continue that. The user is here, Frank Overwood. If I look into the portal in here and refresh the page, active user, now we see, okay, Frank Overwood is here. And if I look into the details of that user, of course, there are all the information I filled in. This user doesn't have any role or something. He's based in the United States, but this user doesn't have a license. That's maybe one thing we have to fix. And the second thing, let's simply log in with that user, go to the portal, use the third browser.
And what you see here and what is important is we are writing directly into Azure Active Directory. And there is an instant feeling how users are created. So, and you see now that Frank Overwood, he has nothing, no license. He has a profile page with his information, which Tony filled in.
So I simply add some license information for that user so that he can access, for example, SharePoint or Exchange and all that stuff. I'm going back in here and refresh the page of Frank. Well,
and then you see this will take some minutes, that the service will be provisioned for that user after he gets the license in Office 365.
So there are 2 tasks. One, first we need to add the license, and the second task is we want to ensure that each user we create can access special SharePoint sites within our company. So we have, for example, this iMac Teams site. Let's see if this user can access this page here.
And I think Frank Overwood is responsible for Washington.
Oh, I think for Austin or something.
Austin? Okay.
Let's see. So this works out of the box. The license has been assigned. And then we have a second URL. It's a site called sites.dc.
So I was right.
I was right.
It's not Austin, D.C., it's Washington, D.C. I'm sorry to say.
And you see, this user isn't entitled for accessing that SharePoint site. And that's the second thing we want to fix. So let's stop our application and add first the license. And I have some code in here. I don't want to type it, so I simply take it and put it in here. After the user is created, we'll do that. How does it work? We create a new assigned license, and then we have to add the SKU ID of that license. How do I get this? Well, we open PowerShell and connect to the service. Of course, I have to authenticate. So I hope I typed it correctly.
Yes.
And we want to see what licenses are in that tenant. And here I see, okay, there's one license. Oh no, yeah, there's one license called Enterprise Pack, and that's the SKU ID. And I simply need to copy that 6FD and something, and that's what we do in here. So we sign that special plan.
So our tenant is within the E3 package in Office 365. And in Graph API, we use the GUID of that tenant SKU.
Exactly. So let's create a second user after the login process. And we also want to add this user to a special group. In the meantime, let's go to our SharePoint site, DC. If you look in here, to this, sorry, of course, not the site contents, site settings, and to the people and groups, we've added a group SharePoint DC, and we simply want to put that new curated user into that group so that he can access this site. So again, the admin login. Sometimes you have to click twice. Don't know why. Okay. So create our second user. And this user, we call her Claire. She's the wife of Frank. Her username is Claire, and the password. Let's see if this works. So let's do all that stuff here. Go to the license. So we are adding that user and add that license. Wait for 1 second, and then we assign it to that user. So let's simply continue here. So here we have our user Claire. And if we go back to our portal and refresh the active users, let's have a look at Claire. And she has the licenses in here. So that worked. The second thing we want to do, we want to give her access to our SharePoint site. So we've added a group page in here where we are reading what security groups are visible in that tenant, and we say, okay, we want to add her to SharePoint DC and to HR, for example. How does that work? I've set a breakpoint in here. So, of course, first we need the user object, which is our Claire. We've made a small function for that. And then we want to get all groups. You see there are 4 groups in that tenant. For example, I think the third one should be, no, that's SharePoint Austin. This one should be that's also human resources where we put, this is SharePoint DC. That's the group we really want to use. And then there's the same story again. We run through all the groups and use directory services, add link, and use that group for putting in that user as a member. So let's simply continue that. Okay, it should be done. Let's have control it here at the security groups and look into the SharePoint DC group, and there now is Claire inside. So let's try it. Close the browser, open it again, log in as Claire. That's Claire. Oops. On Microsoft.com. I hope it's the right. Oh yeah, always these typos on Microsoft. Okay, this is a standard portal. We see all the licenses, and we wanted.
So Claire is already provisioned with her user license and also with the appropriate group. So she should have access to the DC SharePoint site.
So let's try it out. Use this DC site. And now Claire should get access to that SharePoint site. So you see, working with Active Directory is really quick, but some actions, of course, can take 1 or 2 minutes till the user is really a member of that group. Cool.
So what else can we do with Claire? We can provision her My Site. This is also a difference. If you are Frank, you see you don't have any My Site yet.
Exactly, yes. So the third thing, we want to provision the My Site for that user. Usually it takes something like up to some minutes till the My Site is created. So the user experience when accessing the My Site is, welcome to your My Site. It takes some minutes that this site is provisioned. So we want to do that for the user.
Sometimes it takes forever. Our experience, it takes around 5 minutes, but sometimes it in fact happens that a user get not provisioned, so you have to remove the license and provision him again. But most of the times it really works well.
Yes. So what do I need for creating the My Site? I need the user and I need his password. I can't do it as an administrator. So that's why we didn't want that the user changes his password until now. So let's type in the password and click this magic button, create My Site. And I think I have a, okay. Sorry, I didn't have a breakpoint in there, but this is where it happened. We need, of course, the SharePoint URL, where this of the root site of the Office 365 tenant. Then we create the client context for the tenant. We create a password. I think we can step through it and simply do it again. So that's
And this is an action we do in behalf of the user because we, in the moment, we are in the provisioning process, so we know the password of that user, so we will provision the My Site in behalf of the user.
Exactly. So I need the username and I need his password, which is now a secure string. And let's see if it works. We open the website, and if it works, we should get back the site title of that SharePoint collection site. And let's go into the Create My Site. And this is where the magic happens. We need this client context for that user object, and we have to use the profile loader. You get this profile loader from here, from that library. It's this one. It's SharePoint client user profile. So we have to add a reference to that object, and then you can use this profile loader. So this will take, as you mentioned, maybe some minutes. In the meantime, what else can we do with our new user? We want to send him a welcome message so that the user is informed about maybe his login or his SharePoint sites he should access, etc. For that, we've made a send email web page which is very simple. I say, okay, the recipient for that is, in that case, Claire. Welcome to a company and somebody. How do we do that? Well, we need the Exchange Web Services in that case. So there's a reference to that. Then we can make a new instance of a service. Of course, we need to pass some credentials. Who is this user? This is the basic authentication. So you see that the username in that case is the administrator, and there's his password. And now there comes the auto-discover for the user who sends the message. And this can take up, well, maybe a minute or so, depending on what server is responsible for that user. Because depending on the domain, Office 365 has to look up the server and say, okay, where's the server who is responsible for that? We are logged in as Claire. The code is very, very simple. With that, you see we create a new message, add a subject, a body, add the recipient, and send and save copy, so that this email is saved in my own inbox as in the sent object. So let's have a look into Outlook. Of course, it's a new user. Give him some time zone. And the user should have gotten an email right now. Here it is from administrator sent just now. So it's really simple to do that welcome message. The second thing, of course, is how can I read information about the user's mailbox? It's the same story. We create a new list of emails. We are using the Exchange service again. And the credentials, we say auto-discover for that user, which also takes some seconds. And then we say, okay, we want to get the mailbox, the inbox, and put all the information in a list, and then we run through all the items there and add them to our emails list. I simply continue that, and then I get the information about that user. These information or these steps you can use with the Office 365 API, which is simply great, and it's the recommended way to use it. I'm now using basic authentication just because to show you it's also possible, of course, but the recommendation here is definitely use the Office 365 API. We'll point it out a little bit later. Where you can't use the Office 365 API is for remote PowerShell. Sorry. Often you want to get information about a mailbox, statistics, or something like this. This is only accessible with remote PowerShell. We also have a sample in here, mailbox statistics. And I think I also have a breakpoint in here.
This is one point which is on our wish list, that we get a management API for Exchange services too.
Exactly, yes. And let's jump into that get mailbox statistics. And in here, we need to create a workspace for a PowerShell, for running a PowerShell within our website. I think it should continue. This, of course, is time consuming, because opening a workspace, creating an instance of a PowerShell instance, running that PowerShell command, and getting the result back should be, can take some time. In that case, it worked. I get information about the mailbox of the administrator, and I see that the item count of the mails there is 22, and the mailbox size is something like this. If we look in here, just to show you what PowerShell we've run. Let's see, get mailbox statistics. Jump in here. There's the create run space. And, oops. Oops. Where is it? Okay, I see. To go into the controller, which is somewhere here. It's somewhere hidden in the code.
Anyway.
Anyway, it's something like get mailbox statistics or so. This is the PowerShell. And that's also the reason the sample is relatively large. So please download it, have a look at it, look into the details in here, because we just want to give you the idea what's possible with with remote control of Office 365 services. Okay, I think in the meantime we've sent the email, we've looked into the mailbox statistics of a user. Let's look at Claire and have a look at her OneDrive. Maybe these 5 minutes are past now. So if it works, we should get the personal side, and it worked. Because we don't get the welcome, please, this takes some minutes. You see that the My Site is provisioned.
This is quite useful for users where you want pre-provision My Sites and add user photos and also add some documents to the site. And also some companies just want a selected style on the My Site, and you can provision that through that functionality in advance. So the user experience is getting better because they have all set when they first log in into Office 365.
So let's continue this task, and there's one other thing we want to do. Once the My Site is created, we want to upload a welcome document with information for that user into his My Site. And there's also a sample for that.
And I think for that functionality, we are using REST to add
Yes,
a document.
Exactly. So this is the upload file button in here. What we do in here is we need to create the URL we want to access, which is this one, imac-my sharepoint.com and so on. And here you see that the path is API, web, get folder by service relative URI, and so on. And there's the documents and files. So we want to access the files of this My Site. And for that, we have a document prepared, which is in here, upload Word docx. And after we've reading that stream, which is in here right now, scroll a little bit down, we say, okay, with a SharePoint helper, please upload that file with a special token for accessing that My Site. For using that functionality, we created a SharePoint app, which get access to all sites. I will show you in a second. So let's simply continue here and have a look. Before, it didn't work with that user. Let's see if there's a document right in now. It's funny because it worked with user Frank, but not with Claire. There seems to be some difference. There should be a document in here. I think I try it again just to show you if it works. Go back to the portal, log in. Maybe it's a timing or something like this. So, and do the same thing with Frank. Upload the file, simply continue here. And let's have a look at, oh no, his My Site isn't provisioned, I think. Oh. Yeah, that's the experience you get when the My Site isn't provisioned. So it was not a good idea to use Frank. But I hope you see the concept of how to upload a file. It's very simple. You just need the byte stream and put it against the REST service. How did we create that application? Well, of course, it's like any SharePoint application. You need to go to AppRec, new ASPX, say, okay, I want to create a new application and generate some information about it. Say, okay, that's My Site provisioning. The app domain is localhost, for example. You redirect URL isn't important right now. So let's simply create that application within our SharePoint tenant. It's the same story as doing a SharePoint application. Then I get this information in here with the client secret. It's the same story as we had before. After that, we have to grant permission to that application. So you need the client ID. And here you say, I've prepared it somewhere in here. Yeah, here are the permissions. I want to say, okay, this application is gets full control for the whole tenant. And that's the rights we need for accessing the my site of a special user as application. So this is the second step. And the third step, of course, do I trust this application? Yes, I do. And the last step is the app permissions, where I can get information about this application, my site provisioning. And that's exactly what we've done in here in that sample. And if we look at the web config, after the AAD stuff, here we have the information we are using for accessing the my site. So this is how it works. First create the application, then simply use that, and then you can use the REST services of the SharePoint API. There's one thing I still want to point out in the user management, because it's a very important function. If I'm in here and I want to delete a user object, for example, Gary.
So, for example, Douglas was told by Frank that he should delete the president.
Which, of course, is impossible.
Which, of course, is normally impossible. So it tries to go into the management portal and logs in and goes through the deletion of the president.
That's Gary president in our case. And let's try to delete that object and save the changes. And what happens, and that's the standard behavior, we get an error. And if I simply continue there, you see what happens. You see that I'm not allowed to delete that user object. Why is it? Well, that's by default. Microsoft says, okay, you can work with Active Directory, you can read and write, but you're not allowed to delete objects. And first we thought it's an error, and we thought, okay, what's wrong with that? And then we found it on MSDN. You see it's single sign-on, read and write directory data. That's what I did at the beginning. Is not allowed, an application is not allowed to delete objects. Is there a solution for that? Well, of course. And the solution for that is to create a so-called service principal name. The service principal is an object. It resides in the Graph API. I think I'll open it again. And sign in here. And in here, you see there are applications where our application lives. And, pardon?
Screen.
Oh, sorry. Let's duplicate my screen. Then you should see it. OK. So here are our applications. And then you see a node with service principals. And we have to create a service principal to that we are able to delete objects. So let's simply do that. And how do you do it? You do it with PowerShell. And it's right, it's a part of that sample. So you say, OK, I give that administrator a name. And I say the address of that tenant is, the URI is that. And we have to, of course, connect to the service and do some making a secure string of the password. And the actually thing in here is we create a new service principal object and add that service principal object to a special role. And that's it. And after all that stuff, we simply write it to the output. So let's try that. It's my portal. Of course, I have to authenticate again. I hope I typed it correctly again. And if it works, I've now created with that PowerShell that service principal. And what I really need in here are two things, of course. I stop my application. And use these information instead of my application. So let's simply put it in, oh, no, that's that stuff. I need the app principal client ID, which is this. And I need the password for that object, which is this. So simply use these information, rerun the application. Oh, okay. 1 byte too much? Oh, yeah, there was something like, oh, let's make it simple. I've prepared it here. So let's, oh, and it was, oh, I see. Oop. Always this typing. We need the audience URI, of course. So now it should work, hopefully. So let's start our application again. Log in and let's see if we can use the delete method right now. Which can take up a second. So log in. We're still the administrator, but everything we do with user management right now happens in the context of the service principal. So let's go to our Gary object and try to delete him. And simply run through the steps here. And looks good because we are returning to our user list. The object Gary here is away. It's deleted. And of course, the user Gary should be now shouldn't be in the list here and should be in the deleted users. So with a service principal, you can accomplish this task. Cool. So let's go back to our portal. I think these are the main steps for doing the Azure Active Directory manipulations. There's one thing left we want to do. We want to access SharePoint. For example, after we created a user, sent a welcome message, uploaded a document, created his MySet and all that stuff, we want to say that each user shall attend, for example, a training or something when he comes to the company. So we simply want to put him in a SharePoint list. And we have prepared a SharePoint list in here. It's living in the DC site, which is here. And there we've created a simple custom list. The name is events with one record inside, demo made by administrator. And I want to manipulate that SharePoint list. How can I do it? Well, there are actually some ways to do it. Of course, you can log in as user with the password. You can use an application, which is the recommended way, of course. You can use REST, and you can use CSAM. We have all these ways implemented in that demo, so you can look into it. We've made it very easy. The first way in here is we are using the user, and we are using REST for accessing that list. So simply open it. And we see that list, and we say, okay, Frank, or let's new hires training, and Frank shall attend that training. So we simply add him to a list. And what happened right now, if we go back to the SharePoint portal, we see that there's a record Frank with the new hires training in here. And we see that it's made by the administrator. So in that case, we used user and password. This is the second way we also have implemented in that sample is using application authentication. So let's edit that user. Frank, his name is Overwood, and save this object. And here we say, okay, we want to use authorization as application and updated list item. And if we jump into that, so it takes some time. We simply say, okay, we want to access that URL. We want to go to the API, use the list events, and then we are using REST for doing all that stuff. So I simply jump over that. The interesting part in here is if you do it in that way. Come on. That we say somewhere here, we add the information that we don't care about the version, because usually when user A edits a record in SharePoint, he gets something like an e-tag, a timestamp. And if user B opens the record and says, okay, I want to save it, SharePoint says, okay, well, no, there's a newer version made by user A. So with that information, if match star, we say, okay, we don't care. We simply want to update the item. And this is how it works. You can see it in here in that sample. So we've updated that item. And if we go back to our SharePoint list again and to the new hires training record, we now should see that this change wasn't made by the user administrator, but it was made by the app. And that's also the recommended way to use app authentication whenever possible. But of course, you can use user authentication too when it makes sense.
So
sorry.
What we have seen is we can provision user, we can even delete users, we can fill their mailboxes, we can pre-provision their My Sites, send them a welcome message and the welcome document. And also we can do list operations within SharePoint Online.
Exactly.
So, and to summarize that, what we did not show is after we provisioned the user, we should reset his password again and send him his temporary password after that. Then he can log in and set his own one. And then we can deploy our solution to Microsoft Azure. Everything we showed today does not require any server on premises. So we're using Microsoft Azure, and we have a slide where we show which to use when, because we discovered, we started with Azure also, and we discovered that we didn't know how much it will cost if we provision and do those operations within Windows Azure. And what we've seen is, whenever possible, go through Azure websites. It's the cheaper way to do operations, and you can do most of the stuff here. You see you can do Azure Active Directory, Exchange Web Services. You can also do SharePoint and REST operations. What doesn't work there is you cannot use remote PowerShell. There was a way, but they removed it recently for security reasons. So for that, you have to use a cloud service. I think it's a web role or a worker role.
Yeah, it depends, of course, but we decided when we need to do Exchange remote PowerShell operations, we did it in a web role, in a cloud service, and we're accessing that service.
Yeah. And what else do you see? You cannot use PowerShells for SharePoint. For sure, it's the same, and also Lync and Lync PowerShell are not working there. But you can do that in web roles. And a good example is maybe what we did. We created a web service, which is on Azure, and we send the information we need for PowerShell to that web service and do the PowerShell stuff in that web service.
Exactly, but of course you need to secure your cloud service, so you need your own certificate, and well, that's logically.
Yeah.
So this table is really important for us because it took us some time to figure out what works where and what runs where. And Azure Website's our favorite hosting platform, platform as a service. Cloud services, you have to use it sometimes in special cases when you need functionality, which is in red in here.
So a brief summary at the end is our learnings is use graph. The Azure team really focuses on that functionality, so use graph whenever possible when you use Azure Active Directory, and use Office 365 as a software as a service, but you can extend it a lot, as you have seen, and use Azure for your operations against Office 365.
Whenever possible. Then we have a call to action. Please download the sample code if you want to look into it. You can download it right now from blog.atwork.at. We also, if you're not a developer and interested in ready-to-use solutions for Office 365, for what Martina told at the beginning, for delegation, we also have a ready-to-use portal for that. It's delegate365.com. And our final message and our key takeaway is, please use Office 365 services. It's great for developers. You can do a lot of automation there. You can automate processes. I hope we could show you some ways how you can do that and have a look into the demo.
So I think we have 4 minutes left. Are there any questions?
Please.
Can you automatically parse the ASCII UIDs available in APN? Because I have customers who have no ASCII UIDs.
The question was, can we also reassign licenses within users?
Yeah, but also automatically parse in a list box the available ASCII UIDs.
Yes,
Yeah,
you can.
You can via PowerShell and via Graph API. You also can get it from Graph API.
Yeah, and you can also switch licenses between there. You can even use the options within, if you want, for example, provision within the E3 license, but you don't want to provision Exchange or SharePoint, you can also exclude that options in there.
Of course, yeah.
Another question? Yeah.
Have you tried the remote PowerShell portion of it? Can you do all of the remote PowerShell commands that are available in that run space?
Yes. Yes. So the question was, can you do everything which offers remote PowerShell in Exchange in that run space? The answer is yes. You can do that.
That's one really a benefit where
Yeah.
you can use cloud services and give your MSI package to it or install anything you want.
And whenever it's back on Azure websites, I promise we will do a blog post about that, because I think it worked really great in Azure Web Services, and they removed it for security reasons, which are understandable, but which is very useful to have it there.
Sometimes you have to add .NET Framework 3.5 to your cloud service too, because some command lines need that.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that there is a new Office 365
API.
API. When can we get more information?
I think we had it on a slide.
Yeah, we have tons of links at the end of our presentation. And there are 2 sessions about it. Yeah, I simply jumped over it. I'm sorry, because I ran out of time. And the second session is today at 1:30, I think, where they show how to create an Outlook application with this Office 365 API.
Will you share these slides to the Yammer site?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The slide deck is already also on SlideShare, so you can download it there also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Office 365 is really, the new API will be great, but right now it's in a preview status, so you can, for example, read and write to calendar, to contacts, and to mails, for example, and that's what the sample is about, but you don't have more right now.
It's a little bit bumpy in the moment, but it will work. They
Well,
will manage that.
It's bumpy in the ASP.NET MVC version, because they make a redirect to the Office 365 API controller, which doesn't work with the JavaScript in some cases. So they still work on it, and we expect we expect that the API tools will be great in the next weeks or months.
Yeah, and for instance, with the API for Office 365, you can develop a Windows 8 app if you want to, or a Windows Phone app, and use that
It's also using it
for the whole management, because we showed only a web-based solution, and with that management tools, you can also do that.
Yeah, it's of course based on Adele, and Adele is available for ASP.NET for Windows 8 applications, and I think they're working on the phone library as well.
Yeah, yeah,
If you want to run PowerShell for major websites, you can now use web jobs.
Yeah,
Web jobs come under PowerShell.
yeah.
yeah. Web jobs are also great. I like them very much. I mean, they're a replacement or additional for doing tasks to special times or so, or can be triggered, and it's a great solution like cloud services. I mean, it's another way, but
Yeah.
it's great.
What we have seen from our experience is we built a web service to provision a lot of users in the education sector, students, and we use Graph API because we can provision 1,000 users in 25 minutes. You cannot do that with PowerShell. It's too slow. But it was a selected use case for that university where you need it very fast to provision those users. Another question?
Yeah, have you tried using it to move mailboxes from on-premises to cloud services like this?
A migration could be possible, but I think you have to program for the on-premises part of the solution, or you can use the batch modus in Office 365 and Exchange Web Services. Yes.
So I think, yes, of course you can do it, but there are also a lot of migration tools for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Another question? So I hope you liked the show. Another question, yes?
That's a quick question. The link in the slides for the Office 365 API preview
Yeah.
to the API tool. Is the API included in that?
Oh, no, but I can show you we have all the information in here at the end for Graph API, for Adele, for
So
SharePoint, and
you
I
have-
think Office 365 API is the last one, and the first link is really the link to the API, and the second one is to the tools.
Yeah, so that first link goes to Office 365 API tools.
Okay, so this is a wrong link.
So
I'm
that's-
sorry, we will replace that. Thanks for the tip.
Yeah,
Okay?
and upload it again.
Yeah. If you're interested in Exchange migrations, we have a panel discussion in the afternoon. Happy to see you there. It's more around infrastructure, and I hope you liked our session. If you have any questions, we will be here today, not tomorrow, because we're going to build today in the evening. But please just contact us or reach out to us, and we are happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you.